Hello, everyone. Hello and good morning, Sonja. I'm happy to have you here in my podcast because you remember when we last time running the panel session regarding the startup forum, we need to have a forecast and talk about very important subjects. So I'm very delighted and happy to have you here. The subject, just for our audience, what we are going to discuss, we are going to discuss how to lead in the crisis and how CFO is navigating the company towards the crisis. So Sonja, happy to have you here and welcome in my podcast.
Thanks, Cornelia. It's great to be here again and great to chat again. I think this is our third or fourth time having the chance to interact. So looking forward.
Absolutely. Let me quickly run the introduction for Sonja. Sonja is CFO of the company. Basically, I should pronounce your surname as well, because it's a little bit tricky. Sonja Rossteuscher. Correct me.
Perfect.
It's a perfect, because I know you're a Canadian. You are living in Germany. You are the CFO in Frankfurt for Tristron Flowtech Group, which is based on the automotive branch. And a part of being CFO, leading the company, you are the woman in business champion. You are lifelong learning enthusiast, and you are holistic well-being believer. So when I read that description in the LinkedIn, especially in your logo, saying impossible, crossing in, saying possible, and also able, I said, oh my gosh, we need to talk about those aspects, especially in a business.
Absolutely, and I'm happy to do it because it really much is part of who I am and what I believe is necessary to be a relevant leader, be it in finance or any other function today. Yeah,
absolutely. In this podcast, we are going to touch on a different aspect, not really like a core how to be a leader and having tools and strategies, but more tapping into the values. So my question before we start would be, let's start from the beginning. Like I mentioned, you are Canadian, you are living in Germany, but CFOs, they might have a straightforward career from the finance accounting department, or not necessarily. Can you pull a bit curtains about your case, how it started, where you are right now as a CFO of the company?
Sure, absolutely, would love to. In fact, it's interesting to me often if I take the time to reflect that I've ended up in the role that I have, because if you would have asked me in my late 20s when I was near the beginning of my career, where I would love to see myself in the future, I think at the time a lot of people think sales and marketing or something like that is a great function to be in business, and I never could have imagined myself being a leader in finance or a CFO. I started in investment banking, realized very quickly that wasn't for me, and moved into strategy and strategic planning. Was in a few different functions in a few different industries there. Did my MBA in Switzerland, and then with that ended up moving to Germany after my MBA. And that's when I had my first touch point with the automotive industry, working at Robert Bosch at their headquarters in Stuttgart. First of all, in strategy, having the chance to set up a joint venture. And then, in fact, through contacts and colleagues from my MBA program, I was invited by my colleague who was setting up more or less a startup business with 20 million euros in equity to invest in financial services businesses in Africa. And I was in my early 30s, and I thought that sounded really exciting and just a little bit crazy. And I didn't have kids at the time, so I thought, if I'm not going to go on some sort of adventure now, I'm never going to do it. So I took a big risk and I joined him on the journey. He asked me if I wouldn't mind being his startup CFO because I was always good at finance when we were doing the MBA together. I didn't know what I didn't know. I bought myself an IFRS handbook because I thought that would be important, which it wasn't, by the way, to do the job. And I joined him on board. I did that for a couple of years, and then I actually got headhunted into what I would consider a larger, more relevant CFO job, and that's at the company that I'm at now, Trustful. So we are a company with 12 production plants globally with over 350 million euros in sales this year, over 5,000 employees, and present in 11 different countries. So I've been here seeing 2 different shareholders of the group, set up a lot of the functions we have in the business, been able to put together my dream team in the last few years here. It's been a tough ride since COVID, but in the end, I realized I love being a CFO. I love the challenges it has. I don't always love the demands on my time, but yeah, that's my way here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very fascinating what you basically just described. And I see also the pattern, especially which is also visible in your leadership position, because like you mentioned, you took a risk, you figure out, you move to the Africa. And my next question, Sonja, is what, in your opinion, is making a successful leader, especially now in the pandemic? Because we know we might have a leader in a stable time, which they are really great, and they are the leader where they are activating in a crisis part. So what would be your advice for our listeners who are business leaders or owners in that time from CFO perspective? What is the successful leadership?
First of all, I would say it's always harder to lead in a crisis than it is to lead in good times. When there's lots of money available, when there's lots of resources available, then you don't have as many constraints in terms of what you're able to do. Where leadership becomes more tricky is always when there's resource constraints, money constraints, people constraints, market constraints, business constraints, whatever it is. You need to be more creative. And I would say what becomes much more important in leading in a crisis is, on the one hand, obviously that you need to be much more creative. You need to be much more willing to take risks. And you also need to make sure you have great people around you that you trust, and you have to be much better in your listening skills to listen to all the ideas, because certainly in a crisis, there's never any way that one leader has all the answers anyway. But when you get into a crisis situation, it's much more important to lean into your team and to really listen to what they can contribute, and to make sure also that they feel confident and comfortable contributing, and that you give them a place of safety in their work, even when everything around you is turbulent. You have to be able to find a way to, let me put it this way, open an umbrella and take them out of the rain, and let them know that they'll be safe, even if it feels like there's hurricane winds in the background. Yeah. So yeah. I'd say those are some of the real critical aspects, and especially when you're in finance, you're the ones closest to the cash resources of the company. And when a company isn't doing well, it's the access to cash that is usually one of the most critical aspects, and one of the most stressful aspects, frankly, that's left on your desk to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned a very important thing, which is the trust, and create the environment, in terms of giving your people the chance to speak. From your experience and from your daily task, what would be your common advice or the tactics, Sonja, which you are creating that safe space and the transparency? Because if we are talking about the communication, it's also communication inside in the organization as a leader, as a finance leader, and also outside, which are the clients, customers, stakeholders, banks in that case, or investors. How would you like to navigate towards those transparency and the communication? What advices you could give to our listeners and our audience?
You used an important word, and that is transparency to begin with. I think it's important to be transparent and to be open and clear, and make your stakeholders, be it your team members, your financiers, investors, bankers, whoever they may be, that you're aware that there are problems, that you can quantify and those problems, and that you have a plan how to address the problems. So what's important is that everyone understands that there are problems on the table, but you're dealing with it, and it doesn't, and you shouldn't try to hide them and then come around the corner and say, oh, I didn't tell you, something's really bad, but now it's gone sideways. It's important to keep the people in the loop. But at the same time, and here, I think one important anecdote I'd like to give from a recent book that I read that I thought was very powerful. And in fact, it wasn't a traditional book about leadership, but they raised an example, in fact, dealing more so with the realm of parenting, but I think it's equally relevant in a leadership and business context as it is in a parenting context, talking about the fact that when you're in difficult times, think of it like when let's say you were on an airplane for the first time with your family, your kids, your team, whoever it is. And when you're on that airplane for the first time and there's turbulences, something's happening in the air. What's everyone on that airplane doing to figure out if they should feel scared or nervous or what's going to happen? They're looking at the flight attendant, and they're seeing, what's the flight attendant doing? Is the flight attendant panicking now, or is the flight attendant still serving the drinks and the peanuts? Because if they are, it means that the plane's not going down. We have problems, but we need to sometimes, as leaders, as parents, whatever it is, put on a brave face, know that we might not have the answer, the final answer available, but as long as we know that the plane's not going down, that there's a solution, that we find a way also to show our team that they can trust us, that we're there for them, and that this is not going to be something that's going to end the world for anybody. And I thought that was a really powerful example, because I think most of us have been on a plane and can relate to that feeling. Yeah,
absolutely. I love it very much. And I remember myself when I was traveling, and it was really big turbulence through the America. And like you said, it's what the crew is doing, but also what the people next to you are behaving. Are they talking? Are they connecting? It's all about the connection. No, I like that example, and it's very literal and very intuitive as well. Sonja, you touch base also aspect regarding parenting, because you are a woman. I know you are having two wonderful kids. You are a successful mother. You are a successful wife. How to combine those one? Especially leading the company as a CFO. What I'm going to touch here, it's more about the values, and also combine it with the aspect of remote work, be remoted. How that correlate, and what will be your advice, how you manage that, be still successful?
Well, let me start by saying you'll never get away if you have kids and you have a career that takes a lot of your time. You'll always have guilt in multiple directions, and you'll never feel like you're doing everything as good as you could. On the one hand, you have to be kind to yourself, I think, to start with. You need to be able to recognize that giving 100% to everybody all the time is simply not possible unless you're going to lose yourself as well. And if you lose yourself, you're not going to be able to be a great leader, a great parent for anybody. Secondly, and for me, a really important value is boundary setting and prioritization. So I'm very clear that it's family first, irrespective of what my role is in any company. It's my duty, especially being CFO, to have set up proper processes and proxy structures in the organization, so that if there is or was a crisis at home in my family, that first and foremost, I can be there for them. And that someone's got my back also at work, and in terms of being able to deal with those things if I'm out. On boundaries as well, I think it's really important to figure out where your own personal boundaries are, what's important to you. So for me, and my husband as well, it's always been important that we're there, for instance, to bring the kids to bed. So even if both of us have jobs that are important to us and careers that are important to us, it's more important to us that our kids know that one of us is bringing them to bed every night. We don't want to outsource our children so far that we have babysitters managing the whole day. So we've always made sure, since the kids are really small, that one of us are there to take care of bedtime. We also need to decide and set boundaries and priorities about what's important in terms of meal planning, cooking, all of the other stuff that goes with being a parent, having a family, but also having a career. And once you're clear on what your priorities are, you can set those boundaries very well. So for me, my boundary is between 5:30 more or less in the evening until 8 p.m. I'm not available for work calls. I'm not technically available for work unless the building is on fire. Please don't call me. That time is dedicated to my kids. There usually isn't a reason why that can't work, irrespective of what function you have. And I would just encourage anyone, male or female, trying to balance both family and career, to be true to your boundaries. I know I've not always been true. I've let some of those boundaries slip from time to time, and it makes me feel worse, to be honest. Yeah. And as I think about that, and you mentioned at the beginning my LinkedIn profile and the fact that I have holistic well-being believer as one of my basically titles there, and I have that because I truly believe that in the concept of having to take care of your own holistic well-being in order to be not only a great leader, but to have a successful career and to be a great parent as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you mentioned, it's also evolving, and it's also kind of mindset thing when we give ourselves the privilege, isn't it? Once we have that values. And another aspect is also coming to the communicating that to our leader. And what if, for instance, the leader is not accepting that? What will be your advice as, let's say, your daughter is coming to you and having such a situation that she was having a values that she cannot stay longer and is constantly pushed back from the leader? What would be your advice from the listeners if they are living in such an environment? You know what I mean? What would be the advice which you could give?
You know, that's a really good point, because I have to say I appreciate that I'm in a relatively luxurious position at the moment, that I can set my boundaries much more easily than other people may be able to in different positions in an organization. But what I always encourage my team is that I have an expectation of each of you to be clear about your own boundaries. And if I'm asking something that's going over your boundaries, each of us has a personal obligation to make those known. So don't think that people in your environment, your boss, your family members, your friends, understand what those boundaries are unless you're being clear about them. So I would encourage everybody who's in a situation where they feel like, oh, I don't think I can tell my boss that, let's say, I'm not available between these hours, or I'd say, really, why is that? And question that, and then, and then tackle it openly and see if this is just a myth in your head, or if it really is reality. And if it is reality, I would then encourage anyone to think hard about if they are working in the right environment for them.
Absolutely. And sometimes it might be a tough decision, just leave the toxic environment. This is not what we're trying to emphasize, but rather start from the source, which is our values also.
Exactly. And I mean, there's so much you can do if you bring these things forward. I think in the end, if you're not trying to address the issues or the items that are important to you openly in the environment you're in, then you're passively becoming part of the problem, because you should also see yourself as an agent for change and improvement in any environment, if you're in a leadership position yet or not. And in fact, this relates very closely to a conversation I've been having within our management board recently, when we've talked about how we change potentially the evaluation structure we have for all of our employees in the group, where we recently rolled out leadership principles in the company. And we said, okay, should we be evaluating all employees based on their performance, based on leadership principles? For instance, I lead by example, I build energized teams. Those are the types of leadership principles we have. And I have the very clear opinion that every single employee should be evaluated based on their performance against those principles, even if you're not yet leading people, because we want to be identifying and promoting people who are showing that this is the way that they behave, that even if they're not a leader yet, in the organization, that they have what it takes to be a leader under the mindset we want people to work in. Yeah. And I think that's critical. So if you promote someone in the end to be a leader, but you've never told them the things that are important or that we expect from them when they're in that role, then I think you're not giving them the toolkit, or you're not giving them the right training and background to end up being successful and being really a human leader. Because in the end, every business is people business. And if you're not able to build trustful relationships and communicate openly, and frankly, like the people you're spending most of your working hours with, you're never going to be successful. Yeah. It's, for me, pretty simple in the end.
You've touched a very important subject regarding the evaluation, which is very common in the corporate world. Yeah. And I love that idea where in the companies, such a discussion is put on the table, not only on the employees, but also taking the responsibility on our leaders who are creating the leaders. And like you mentioned, because people we are the leaders, regardless if we have a title or not having authority. But I highly believe that also the bigger responsibility is for the existing leaders to create the environment. And I'm so happy to have you here to share and spread that voice and be disruptive as well for other organizations to flip it around and look at it from a different lens perspective. That's why this is how changes are happening. That's why your company, it's luxury, like you mentioned, you need to also create that luxury space for the organization, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's and you know, in times of crisis and in times of shift and change, overall, you know, as you mentioned, this whole shift to more remote work, people therefore have way more options than they did. Companies are in crisis. Companies have to reconsider everything from how they deal with digital topics. They have to figure out new ways to do planning, work more flexibly, deal with more volatile environments, be ready to deal with the pandemic. Yeah, whoever thought we'd be thinking about what it means to deal with the pandemic? And all of those things mean you need more trust than ever before. And so in the end, you need, even though you're physically further away from the people you work with and the people you need to trust and rely on, you need to find ways to bring them close. Yeah. And in the end, you bring people close by showing that you care about them. I mean, but you can only show you care about somebody if you really mean it. In the end, if it's fake, people will figure it out sooner or later. So this is critical. And this is why I really believe people who have a fundamental human touch, irrespective of what area of business, even in what feels like one of the most technical areas like finance, you will be absolutely successful there if you're able to bring that human touch to that area of the business. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I see very clearly, Sonja, because we started the discussion saying how to be successful leader. Now I see more and more and clearly the situation, the environment which you create in your organization, it's paying off right now because what you did early years in before, isn't it? That's why this is like a payoff and paycheck. And like you mentioned, be closer doesn't mean you have to be closer sitting in the same office, you know?
No, not at all. And, you know, and it also doesn't mean that you have to try to get together to have drinks on Zoom every Friday night, which nobody wants to do, by the way, anymore. It was a novelty maybe for 1 or 2 months when the pandemic started. Now everyone's happy as soon as they can turn off their video call and actually go back to analog life for a little bit more time. But all of these things and all of these feelings continue to change. And we just need to make sure that, you know, in any kind of organization, we continue to challenge ourselves and how we handle problems and topics to continue to grow and learn and become better, and think about if the way we're working is really still relevant or modern or acceptable or whatever it is. And I mean, clearly the older I get, the harder that is, but it also makes it exciting to keep working on it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Like in your bio, it's also mentioned you are a constant learner through this holistic view. And actually, you know what is also what I see through all these responses which you are giving me is constant improvement, is constant adaptation. challenging also status quo, isn't it? This is also the kind of mindset which we should have. Sonja, I cannot omit to ask you, if I'm having CFO on the podcast, talking about also risk management. Can we give to our audience who are the leaders, who are leading but without authority, how to look for the company from the risk management perspective? Because you also mentioned at the beginning, there are cash flows, which are very important. What would be your advices for people who are in the organization to look for the risk management lens in that sense, like very critical one?
And let me, absolutely a critical topic, and clearly as a CFO, risk management is one of my priorities. And I will say that, I will say up front though, that it's really important. And what I'm going to say doesn't mean that you shouldn't always within an organization or even within the finance function be thinking about opportunities as much as you're thinking about risks. And I would encourage, in fact, the thinking around risks to be opportunity and risk focused. And that's exactly also how we have at Triston also set up, for instance, our risk reporting system in the company. We've said we expect all the leaders in our organization twice a year to do a comprehensive review of all the risks in the business area that they're responsible for. But not only think about the risks, they also in the same report are challenged to think about the opportunities, because within each risk can also be a buried opportunity. It really depends how you're looking for it. And I recognize that also we don't have a world with limited risk. In fact, we have a world where the risks that exist are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But within most of those, there's opportunities for us to get better at something. For instance, the crisis, let me use a very specific example. If we look at when COVID first hit over a year and a half ago now, we were in a situation where our in-payments from customers, accounts receivable overdues, were at a situation, they were low double digit, they were over 10% or around 10%. Because of the crisis, because of the challenge of having less cash and limited liquidity resources, we looked at the processes that we had in the business and the risks that we had around collecting money from our customers, and we became way more proactive. And there was a huge buried opportunity in there. And the opportunity was to substantially reduce our accounts receivable overdues and pull forward the payments we were receiving from the customers. And we ended up reducing our overdues systematically by half. So they're now, in general, under 5% instead of being over 10%, which ended up bringing in an extra couple of million euros for our business in terms of having cash available for the operation. So this is just an example to say, when you look at a risk and a problem you need to solve, in that problem is usually a great opportunity for your business, and that you can usually carry beyond the end of that risk. So that would be a message with respect to risk management I would want to give to your listeners.
This is very, very eye-opening kind of mindset, because I remember when we also have another panel discussion for the Startup Forum, you also concluded one very powerful statement, which means we don't need to have a crisis. Actually, we might have a kind of way of looking to the business, like you just mentioned, opportunities. So crisis is just a matter of time when it's going to come. But why just wait for the crisis to be in a hustle mode instead of doing something like you mentioned proactively? No. Exactly.
But the thing is, the crisis makes it a priority. The problem is usually when the times are good, we're not prioritizing getting better because we don't have to, because things are okay the way they are. So that is the opportunity also in the crisis. Yeah, because you end up the other side of the crisis when you make it through to be stronger and better and more robust as a business. But the issue is it's a roller coaster to get that to that other side of the crisis. And if times are good, it's also important to have some periods where you can lay back and enjoy a little bit more the fact that, you know, you don't have to be as worried about risk. But definitely, as you said, you shouldn't stop improving only because there isn't a crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's leave it our audience with such a statement. My last question, which I would like to ask and get your opinion about, the remote work, you know, What is your approach as a CFO? Is it something, of course, we need to adapt, absolutely, this is the new environment, but what is your advice and what we should be looking on a different angle of perspective as well as a leader? So, can you share your opinion about that?
Yeah, I am very open to the concept of general remote work. At the same time, I believe that 100% remote work isn't necessarily healthy. Also on an individual level, I think it's important for us as human individuals to connect in person in an analog way with people and not just via Teams and via email, because over time you see that the tone changes, the personal aspect comes out of it, and really to work collaboratively and successfully together over a long period of time, it's important to have personal touch points. So I would encourage any of your listeners to be very open-minded with respect to remote working concepts, but not to think that because remote working works, that you should not get together at all, or you should neglect the importance of also face-to-face contact. I mean, we've introduced back into the context of the COVID restrictions we still have, of course, in Germany at the moment. We've introduced back a 1 day a week presence in the office, and we've structured that in our headquarter department by department. So we've told each department, please pick 1 day a week where your department will be in the office, so that if people need to interact also with your department, they'll know that on that day you guys will be there. And on the other days, we continue to follow a completely flexible remote working structure for all of the employees at the moment. And I think that that's been really well received. And also it's been really well received that people have the opportunity to also now connect with certain people in person and know when those people will also be available physically somewhere. So again, it's a tricky balance, especially since COVID is not fully behind us yet. And I think it's one that's continuing to evolve, but I don't think anyone anymore can imagine an environment without remote work. And I would encourage every company to be much more flexible in their thinking about that, because in the end, an employee can be equally unproductive sitting at their desk in the office as they are at home if they're not motivated and they don't trust or like the people that they work with. So just turning the lens on that around to say, just because I'm sitting in the office doesn't make me more or less productive than if I'm sitting somewhere else.
Yeah, it's a very powerful statement, and we should keep it in mind. I mean, especially the leaders. So Sonja, it was very wonderful discussion with you, sharing all these different aspects from the leadership, from the CFO perspective, and how to tackle all of this for the crisis and how to navigate toward crisis. Where our audience can find you. So if you can give quickly our audience, yes, where they can find you.
I think the best place to find me, if anyone's interested, is LinkedIn. I will say as well that I do not accept LinkedIn contacts without a personal note of your interest in connecting with me, because I don't view it as Facebook for professionals. I really view it as a platform where I want to connect with like-minded people, and I would like to know why any people that I may not have met yet in person believe that we have something like-minded in common. So the best place to find me, again, as you mentioned, on LinkedIn, Sonja Rossteuscher, I'm there. And I would love to hear from some of your listeners on any of the topics that we discussed. So it was a pleasure, Cornelia, as usual.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Absolutely. You'll see, guys, what Sonja actually set the boundaries. This is the values which she is having as well. It's clearly communicated. It's very good example. Thank you, Sonja, very much. Pleasure as always. And if you like Sonja mentioned, any other topics which you would like to explore, what you like more, we can come back and give you more content about that. Thank you very much, and talk to you soon.
Thanks, Cornelia. Take care.